Hello, stakeholders. The Ministry of Education, through the Curriculum Planning and Development Division, conducted national diagnostic assessments in mathematics and English language arts in September 2021. This presentation is based on findings and recommendations for mathematics. The objective of the diagnostic assessments are as follows. Firstly, to determine the extent of learning loss in mathematics among primary and secondary students, which was brought about by the onset of the pandemic in 2020. The findings of the assessment data were used to identify areas of the mathematics curriculum taught in the past academic year that require remediation and intervention. Hence, every year-level assessment was based on the mathematics curriculum content of the past academic year. Another objective is to support principals, teachers, and parents with specific strategies for further diagnosis and remediation that target improved student performance in mathematics. To do this, the Curriculum Division has produced several documents that support further diagnostic strategies in mathematics, as well as curricular adaptation, such as the Optimal Learning Guidelines document shared with teachers of primary and secondary schools. Recommended remediation strategies were also shared with teachers of primary and secondary schools. And further in this presentation, we would look at some examples from these documents, and we will look at the link in which all stakeholders can access these documents. There were some limitations in the conduct of the assessments. The assessments were not administered in a controlled environment. This is because the schools were responsible for conducting the assessment, whether online or through printed packages that were given to students. And so these procedures were not standard. Therefore, caution needs to be exercised when making inferences about students' performance. The data submitted by schools can inform performance in the mathematical strands and not levels of performance of students. The class teacher, however, has individual students' performance data, which should be used to inform on interventions to remediate areas of weaknesses and fill gaps in content and skills due to learning loss. Let's look at the primary level assessments. The format for the primary level assessments was multiple choice. The 4 mathematical strands of the primary curriculum were assessed at every level. These are number, geometry, measurement, and statistics. The number of items for each test level varied. Therefore, Infant 2 and Standard 1 contained 10 items, Standard 2 and 3 contained 15 items, and the assessments for Standard 4 and 5 contained 20 items. Let's look at the secondary level assessments. There were some differences here in terms of the number of strands. In Form 1, the diagnostic assessment, being multiple choice, had 25 items. You will remember that the assessments were based on the previous year's curriculum content. Hence, the Form 1 test was based on the Standard 5 curriculum. So, 4 mathematical strands were assessed in the Form 1 test. These were number, geometry, measurement, and statistics. For Form 2, similarly, there were 25 multiple choice items and 4 mathematical strands being assessed: number operations and number theory, measurement, geometry, and statistics. Form 3 had 30 items as the assessment. 6 mathematical strands were assessed here based on the Form 2 curriculum. These were number operations and number theory, algebra, sets, relations, and functions, measurement, geometry, and statistics. Let's look at the overall findings for primary. The graph shows the national average performance by levels and strands. On the horizontal axis, you will notice the class levels, infant 2 to standard 5. Note that infant 1 was not diagnosed. Each bar is representative of each mathematical strand, number, geometry, measurement, and statistics taught at the primary level. If we look at the progression from infant 2 to standard 2, what we see is that students' performances in number, geometry, and measurement are at an acceptable level, mostly above 75%. However, students' performances in statistics were below 80%, with the highest performance of 76.39% occurring in Standard 1. As we look at the Standard 3 to Standard 5 levels, we note that students' performances in the four strands were consistently below 80%. Here are the findings for the secondary level. The graph is based on the national average performance by levels and strands. On the horizontal, you will see the strands taught at the secondary school: number, geometry, measurement, statistics, algebra, sets, relations, and functions, up to the Form 3 level. Students' performances in number and geometry were above 70% in Form 1, but there was a gradual decline in both strands by Form 3. The performance in the measurement strand was consistently in the band of 50% to 55% in Forms 1 to 3, with the highest performance in Form 2. Student performance in statistics declined from 50.43% in Form 1 to 36.68% in Form 3. Performances in the strands of algebra and sets, relations, and functions measured only at the Form 3 level were respectively 49.82% and 27.91%, respectively, meaning on average, this was the percentage of students who got these items right nationally. As you would recall, I mentioned the supporting documents produced by the Curriculum Division. For teachers, we have produced recommended remediation strategies for both primary and secondary levels. And also, for parents, there are recommended remediation strategies for parents and guardians to support students' development of core content and skills in mathematics for both primary, infant 2 to standard 5, and secondary for Form 1 to Form 3. These resources could be found at the link given on the slide. Now let's look at some of the recommendations for teachers for primary and secondary. And these excerpts are taken from the document shared with teachers of primary and secondary schools. The recommended strategies for remediation are classified into 3 levels based on the number of correct items per strand. 3 levels of students' performances were addressed in each strand: levels 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 recommendations address very little or no understanding of content in the respective strands. Level 2, a bit higher than Level 1, these recommendations would address minimum to average understanding of content in the respective strands. And Level 3 recommendations address both average understanding of content, above average understanding of content in the respective strands. This is an excerpt from the recommendations for teachers for primary, and it is done for infant 2 in the strand of measurement. And the content area identified is exploring and describing objects using the language associated with mass, weight, example, heavy and light, so as to develop the concept of mass and weight. If we look at the three levels, we would identify that the students who would have 0 to 1 item correct in this strand, there are certain remediation strategies recommended. Most of these strategies would deal with the concrete and having students lift objects to describe their weight or display objects according to their weight. Language development is encouraged through discussion about heavy and light objects that could be found in real life. At the level 2, students could go further to design activities and games to find objects that are heavier or lighter than given objects. Again, the encouragement of the use of the appropriate vocabulary is done here. At the third level, students who would have gotten 3 items right and may still need some support can do further work for reinforcement. These strategies listed here would offer that support. For example, allowing students to identify objects in worksheets according to mass and weight descriptions, encouraging students to write or complete sentences about the weight of objects. Also, using learning materials such as instructional videos, worksheets, and newspaper pullouts for reinforcement and practice. And these are also produced by the curriculum division. Language, again, is emphasized here, and through the recommendation of the use of word walls, spelling competitions, oral drills, and quizzes to enhance retention and recall of the spelling of new words. Here we have a recommendation for parents, and we are looking at the standard 2 and 3 level, and we are looking at the strand of statistics. As you notice, the activities here can be done at home with your students. For example, you can encourage your child to sort household items. As your child tidies up toys or clothing, discuss with them which items should go together and why. Involve your child in organizing food items in the refrigerator, example, fruits together, vegetables together, drinks on one shelf, condiments on another, and so on. You can even work with your child to create a vehicle chart, as shown, where you tally the number of specific vehicle types, example, car, SUV, bus, motorcycle seen during a 15-minute period or any other period as observed by you and your child. Remember to include the discussion to bring out the language of statistics. Which type of vehicle did you see the most? Which type of vehicle did you see the least? Why do you think you saw more of one type than of another? Do you think the chart would look different on a weekend than on a weekday? Here is another example of a recommendation for parents, and this is for students at the standards 4 and 5 levels, and it's based on number and the concept of fractions. So we want to help our students to build the understanding of fractions around the house, and we want them to do that using to develop the idea of wholes and parts. So use objects around the home, such as pieces of paper, towel, placemats, even a pizza, picture frames, mirrors, a magazine, and books. Ask children to show you one half of each object. They can use a string to mark the halfway point. Let them do a lot of folding and cutting of paper under your supervision and compare to see that each part or piece is the same size, because these are important ideas for fractions. Have children show quarters, then thirds of objects by folding, cutting, or using pieces of string. Let them compare sizes, which is larger, one half or one quarter of the towel, one half of the towel or one quarter of a blanket. Ask questions, for example, is one half always larger than one quarter? You can use simple problems around the home to encourage your child to develop ideas about fractions. For example, Daddy bought 10 mangoes. Share the mangoes equally among the 5 persons in the house. You can have your children draw a chart such as this one shown, in which they actually divide the 10 mangoes into 5 groups. Let them understand that each part of the set must be equal. Have them share the mangoes in 5 equal parts. Let them see that each person will get 1/5 of the set of mangoes. We move on to recommendations for teachers secondary, and another excerpt from the document prepared for teachers of the secondary system. We look at Form 3 and we look at the content area, the strand of sets, relations, and functions. And we look at remediation strategies prepared for differentiating among a relation, a mapping, and a function. At level 1, we want to encourage our students to work with the concrete examples and real-life examples. Have students review number patterns and number sequences. Have them use real-life examples to represent the concepts. Guide students in listing the attributes of each structure, making comparisons, stating the relationships among numbers, recognize when patterns and rules are present, and appreciate the importance of order. At this level 2, we want to develop the language and the understanding of the technical terms. So teach the technical terms such as element, ordered pair, domain, range, mapping rule, or set. We continue at level 2 with similar strategies at a higher level. Present a broad range of selected and sequenced instructional examples. Guide your students to identify the concepts from different modes of representation. Example, ordered pairs, mappings, tables, or graphs on the Cartesian plane. Highlight specific examples with pictorial representation. Example, the one-to-one mapping, many-to-many mapping, or many-to-one mapping. Explore linear functions and quadratic functions. Allow students to define the concepts using the technical vocabulary, which should be taught. At the third level, provide instructional scaffolding, giving temporary guidance while students learn the new concepts. Provide practice opportunities that allow students to verbally convey their mathematical understanding and to work with visual representations of the concepts of relations and mappings and functions. Provide frequently well-designed review opportunities that are appropriately spaced over time. Let's look at a recommendation for parents, and we look at the Form 3 level and the strand of geometry. At home, you can help your child to build structures using matchsticks and also give a description of the structure. When traveling together, ask your child to identify objects with the same size and shape. Have your children look at the shapes of objects when you cut straight through them. Example for vegetables and fruits, where they would understand the concept of cross-section, uniformity, and symmetry. Use the hands of the clock to state whether the angles formed are more than or less than a right angle. Find other examples around the home in which students would examine angles, for example, in the opening and closing of a door. In closing, I wish to remind you of the valuable resources that you can find at the link given. Please use the link to access these resources for your understanding and to support your students and your children. Thank you for viewing.